Hello. I thought today I would talk a little bit about aesthetic humility and having humility when approaching the arts. It's a concept that I found incredibly useful for me in my journey through discovering classical music and falling ever more deeply in love with it, and also just the arts more generally. I found it incredibly useful. So I thought first I'd give a short little summary of my history with this. Um, I grew up as a musician, basically. I mean, from the age of 8 or 9, maybe 9, I started playing guitar, and I loved rock music and blues and reggae, and Jimi Hendrix is my first uh, favorite human, probably him and Ronaldinho, and for different reasons, obviously. And I always loved music, but maybe when I was a teenager, I started making electronic dance music, and that was really fun and exciting, and it was very in vogue at the time. And I continued playing guitar. And when I was maybe 19, 18 or 19, this was in 2014, so 29 now. And yeah, so when I was about 19, I had a friend, and he was a better musician than I was. He was a fantastic pianist, and he didn't study in a conservatory or anything, but he was a fantastic pianist, and he had really fantastic taste in music. I think he was the first person that I had in my life where I really trusted his recommendations because he was always spot on. And first it was Thelonious Monk, and I was fascinated by Thelonious Monk. It seemed to just be much richer than the dubstep style electronic dance music that I was making. And so I went through a brief period of really obsessing over Thelonious Monk and listening to everything I could of his. But I also knew that this friend liked classical music. And I had never really listened to classical music, and he had never explicitly showed me anything. Um, I think actually once he showed me the Grosse Fuge from Beethoven's String Quartet that was later, removed as a movement in the wider string quartet because it didn't make any sense and just is now its own standalone thing. And it really couldn't have been a worse introduction to classical music. Um, so I just found it really puzzling and kind of ugly, honestly. So that was the only thing he explicitly showed me. So yeah, he did make one mistake in his recommendations for me, but generally he was spot on. So I remember one night in December of 2014, I was particularly depressed and just kind of in a mood. And I did what I often did at the time, which was kind of looking for music that would make me feel sad, and then I could kind of wallow in my sadness. And I used to do that a lot when I was a teenager. And so he came to mind for some reason, and I knew he loved Beethoven, and so I typed in Beethoven minor piano, I think. I knew minor more or less meant sad. Like I said, I was a musician. I didn't really know anything about theory at the time. But, I knew minor stereotypically meant sad. So I figured that was my best shot at finding something self-pitying and uh, melodramatic. And I stumbled upon the Pathétique Sonata number 8, and I turned it on. And luckily, the version that I first came across was Arthur Schnabel, which is an amazing recording. The sound quality is really bad, but his interpretation is amazing. And I listened to it, and I was in such a contemplative mood at the time. Like, I really wasn't thinking about anything else. I was just listening really deeply to music, which was not how I tended to listen to music. I tended to do it, either at a party or while I myself was making it, so with my headphones on, typically while I'm multitasking. And this was one of those rare instances where I really wasn't multitasking, wasn't trying to do anything else. And just immediately I was fascinated by it. And, I'd heard Für Elise and I don't know what else. Für Elise and, okay, of course, the Fifth Symphony and maybe Pachelbel's Canon. I think those were like the three things that I had known of classical music. So I'd never heard this before, and I'd never heard anything like it. And I remember the first thing that struck me was the form, which is a weird sort of thing to first pop out at you when you're listening to music. But I think part of it is because I was creating music. I was creating music where the transitions were very blocky, where, there'd be two or three important sections of a piece, and then I had to just invent some way of getting from one to another. In electronic music, that's like incredibly formulaic, typically. So the transitions are like the least interesting part of the music that I had been creating at the time. And in Beethoven, it was exactly the opposite. I mean, like, they were almost more interesting. And it was so organic how he would go from one section to the other. And they didn't really even sound like separate sections. I didn't know anything about sonata form, didn't know what a development section was, or the exposition or the recapitulation, none of that. But it all sounded really connected. And so I listened to that, and that really blew me away. There's also some interesting rhythmical stuff that he does once that first theme comes in. And then, the first movement ends, and then the second movement started, and that was really what, like, stuck with me. And I really, since hearing the second movement of that sonata, it was just weird. It's like I had a hardware or software upgrade all at once in my brain. And I know it's not typically like that with people experiencing classical music, that, maybe it takes a while. For me, it was really an immediate thing. And I immediately stopped making electronic music because it all sounded so meaningless to me after hearing Beethoven. And that's when I decided to start listening to great music. I mean, in saying great music, that might sound judgmental. I am judgmental about music. And I think it applies, and really nothing was clearer to me at the moment than this difference in quality between what he was doing and what I was doing and what the majority of people I was listening to were doing. He was just on a different level. So that was my first experience with classical music and my first experience with really what I would call aesthetic humility. And that is really taking generation after generations of people at their word. And I think it was Roger Scruton that I heard once say that you could define culture as a collection of things that people have loved. And I thought that was a beautiful way to put it. And that went through my head when I was searching that Beethoven sonata. That, this friend who I really respected as a musician, he loves this, but not only him. I mean, I knew the name Beethoven. I knew, like, one biographical fact about him, which is that he was deaf, or that he went deaf. And so I knew people loved this. And they turned out to be absolutely right. It turned out that the music was really deserving of the praise and the credit that it has gotten. And that just opened the door for me to classical music. And then later to just great art in general. Was the idea that if something has been revered by many different generations in many different countries, many different cultures, probably if you listen to it or you experience it and you don't love it, the problem is probably with you. And it's not with the piece. And that shouldn't be depressing. To me, that is like the most exciting thing in the world, is that there's like a bunch of these nuts to crack that I really, I just have a hunch that, okay, there's something there that I'm missing. And I now basically take that as true every time I have this feeling because it always has been true in my experience, starting with my experience with Beethoven. So I think aesthetic humility is an incredibly important thing to have, and it is the thing that gets in the way most of appreciating great art, I think. We have a lot of extremely shallow concepts about aesthetics in our culture. One of them is beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and there are different ways of interpreting that, but just generally the way uh, it seeps into our consciousness is like, okay, I like vanilla ice cream, you like chocolate ice cream. It doesn't make any sense to debate which one is better. We just have different tastes. And I thought that was also the case with music. And I think most people would say that, at least if they were asked. Most people, I don't think, actually act like this when you press them on it, but most people would at least claim to believe that. And I certainly did. So that is a really damaging thing for growing your taste. Because, well, first, yeah, what does that even mean to expand your taste or to improve your taste? That already kind of gets you out of subjectivism, and we have subjectivism really deeply ingrained in our culture. So yeah, it's a stumbling block. And as long as we're really subjectivists, there's really not much to do. You like Bach, I like Lady Gaga, and who's to say who was right? So, if we can have a little bit of aesthetic humility and say like, okay, well, Lady Gaga is enjoyed. This is really out of date. I don't. Okay, Taylor Swift, I guess, is more up to date. It's like, okay, she's loved now, or enjoyed now, might be better. Her music is enjoyed. She's loved. There's a weird distinction there. Maybe that's a topic for another video. But that's just right now. I would be shocked if that was true in 200 years. But, with Beethoven, that has been true. With Bach, it's been true. And with all these great composers. So, that's really an important thing for us to keep in mind is to have an open mind. And when listening to something that has been revered, if you don't like it, that's absolutely 100% fine. You can give it another shot. You can switch to something else, but just don't write it off. Maybe you need to listen to it again. Maybe you need to listen to it like next year. Sometimes these things really take a while. And when exactly they hit is a little bit random. It's not always clear to me why I started liking Mozart when I did. I started liking Mozart pretty late, yet maybe he's more accessible than some people. So there really is a place for personal taste. But don't write something off if you don't enjoy it right away. For me, realizing this with classical music was also just immediately applicable to the world of literature. And I thought, well, what's like the best book ever? What's a book that people have loved for a really long time? And I think I went through a list, and okay, there was Ulysses by James Joyce. That would be like the literary equivalent of starting with the Grosse Fuge by Beethoven. Probably a dumb idea. It's not like I hadn't read a book before, but I wasn't really a connoisseur of literature. I still am not, but I have more experience with literature now. But Anna Karenina was on that list. And so I said, yeah, well, time has been correct with Beethoven and with Chopin, who's my other favorite at the time. Maybe they're also right in the world of literature. And to this day, I think reading Anna Karenina is in like the top 10 most important things I've ever done. Like, it was an amazing experience. I think about this book at least on a weekly basis, and it sticks with me. And the same with Crime and Punishment. And I really don't think that would have happened had I not found Beethoven, and had I not found that the test of time is actually a really accurate test. And as I've already kind of pointed out, it's very different than like the test of what is popular now, because that is largely arbitrary in modern culture. It's largely influenced by money, just paying for a lot of advertisement and connections and all of this stuff. And that fades after time. But, 200 years, you still hear about somebody. You should probably take them seriously. So I will give a couple examples of, since Beethoven, experiencing first not liking a composer and then eventually starting to like them. And the first that comes to mind is Stravinsky. When I first went into a conservatory, I don't know if I could tolerate any more dissonance than like, I don't know, that really chromatic passage in Opus 10, number 3, Chopin, this the famous etude. Like, that was basically as chromatic and as dissonant as I could get. And so they played The Rite of Spring, and that was like, I just couldn't get it. And it actually like angered me. And I had a real lack of humility with that. I thought that, I'd basically discovered all that there was to discover as far as like great composers, which is like, it's crazily arrogant. And so I point this out to say that, I don't learn the aesthetic humility lesson once, at least in my case. It's something that I've had to relearn continuously and that I'm still learning. And I promise you there's some composer that I'm writing off now, that I'm just misunderstanding, and that at some point in the future, I will create a video telling you how wonderful they are. And that was Stravinsky for a while. I could not listen to The Rite of Spring and understand why anybody would like this other than that it was shocking, and I thought that was the whole purpose. It's not. And now I love Stravinsky. I really, really love Stravinsky's music. And I also had this with Prokofiev. Prokofiev was pretty inaccessible to me, other than like the Dance of the Night, which is pretty easy to like, but anything aside from that, his longer form works, absolutely not. I couldn't do it. I now love Prokofiev. Schoenberg is kind of I respect the hell out of Schoenberg. I couldn't listen to his music in the beginning. It's now not ugly to me. I don't usually love it, and the stuff that I do love of Schoenberg is his tonal stuff. Friedel-Ferden is one of my favorite choral pieces of all time. But I wrote him off because I didn't immediately get it. And even more importantly, Berg. I heard the word atonal and thought nothing could possibly be good in atonality, and that's not true. The music of Berg is fantastic. His violin concerto is like the most tonal, atonal thing I've ever heard. And it's beautiful exactly for that reason. So those are experiences that I've had that have kind of reinforced this idea that I'm always growing, that it's not a great idea for me to just write somebody off immediately. And that, we still hear the name Schoenberg, we still hear the name Berg. Maybe if I don't like it, maybe the problem's with me. Now, all of that is not to say that you should always mistrust your opinion after repeated listening. And I say that to say that art is one of the easiest fields in which frauds can gain prominence, because the subject matter is like intrinsically abstract and nebulous, especially with music. Music is really abstract. It's not representative. It's not a representative art. And I think it's very easy for a composer or an artist who has no talent, or has very little talent, to just make something that's terribly difficult to enjoy or understand, or that nobody in fact does enjoy or understand, and pass that off as actually a sign of its greatness. Because you think of, I don't know, the late string quartets of Beethoven, they were really difficult for people at the time, and they're still really difficult for people, but they're phenomenal. And so the bad logic is something like, well, Beethoven is great and difficult to understand. I am difficult to understand, therefore I am great, which obviously doesn't work as a syllogism, but it happens all the time in art, and especially in modern art. So, um, there are lots of composers that I really dislike, and a lot of art that I really dislike, and I'm still pretty confident. I'm never 100% confident. I don't think. Yeah. Maybe like 4 minutes and 33 seconds, I'm like really firmly convinced that that's a waste of everybody's time. But, his sonatas for, John Cage's sonatas for prepared piano are super interesting and more than interesting. They are genuinely fascinating to me and enjoyable to listen to. But specifically 4 minutes and 33 seconds, I think, is just worthy of derision and laughter. So that's probably as close as I get to 100%. But yeah, there are lots of composers that I listen to and I do just write off. And part of that is because I'm more knowledgeable about music now. I've been studying music for 5 years, like formally studying in a conservatory for 5 years. So I kind of know when I need to re-listen and when I can just say, okay, this is just like conceptual art that I really don't like. And if there's anything to this, I could probably get that same thing in a more enjoyable package. So, yeah, I don't want to give the impression that you should just always mistrust what other people say, because there are some sources that are just bad sources of recommendation. And unfortunately, academia, I think, is increasingly, actually maybe decreasingly, I think it's getting a little bit better, but it is not a great place to take a recommendation for what to listen to, at least from like the composition departments in most schools. And neither is like the Billboard charts. So don't take everybody at their word, but also don't take yourself to be infallible in these things. And yeah, I would say it's a little bit like the frauds in contemporary art. They remind me a little bit of Deepak Chopra. I don't know if you all know who Deepak Chopra is. I'm sure some of you do. He's like a pseudoscientist who writes. He seems to have like a cursory understanding of quantum mechanics and knows like the term the observer effect, and then just writes about how like you observing something and your interaction with something fundamentally changes the nature of the universe and blah blah blah. And he uses a lot of confusing sounding words and or like scientific-y sounding words. And people get confused because like real science uses scientific sounding words, and so does he. So there must be some connection, and really there is not a connection. So yeah, I would say to keep an eye out for that. And I think that's about all I have to say with aesthetic humility. It should be the most exciting thing in the world for you. It's still very exciting for me because I think I know what I'm talking about with music. I'm not a complete imbecile in literature, but I am a complete imbecile in visual art and in poetry. And so I'll give you an example. Growing up, I remember enjoying reading Edgar Allan Poe's poetry. And then I was reading a book about poetry, and the guy was talking about how horrible of a poet Edgar Allan Poe was. And I was kind of shocked because I enjoyed Edgar Allan Poe. And then it made me doubt it because this person knows what he's talking about. And So now I don't just adopt this person's opinion, like, okay, Edgar Allan Poe is terrible, because I don't know if I believe that. But yeah, I don't know that he's a fantastic poet. And T.S. Eliot is like exactly the opposite, where people revere T.S. Eliot. And I've read some T.S. Eliot, and I don't get it, but I don't hate it. I enjoy some of it, but I have this impression that there's something like just behind the curtain that I need to pull back, and I will get it. And already with T.S. Eliot, I've gotten a little bit of that. And so the test of time is just a fantastic signal for me, and it's really exciting because you wouldn't want everything that is great in culture through the history of humankind to be immediately accessible to you, would you? I mean, that sounds incredibly boring. Like, to me, that is what pop music is for. And that's what, like, donuts, and, like, all sorts of things that we, have in our modern life, that's what they're for. They're here for instant gratification. And some things, the better things, are more difficult. So, yeah, you won't get it right away. But that's exciting. It means for your entire life, you'll have something new to discover, hopefully. So, let me know what you all think of that, if this has been the case for you. And I would also, yeah, I'd be totally open to some suggestions on poetry or visual art sources that could make me less of an idiot on this subject. And okay, I say idiot completely tongue-in-cheek. You're not an idiot if you don't understand something. You're just uninformed, and everybody's uninformed in something, and that's part of life. Becoming more informed is great. So that's what I've got to offer for you all today, and I hope it was informative or thought-provoking. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the next video. Bye-bye.